The dawn over the waters of southern Oregon often arrived with a raw and vibrant beauty. The sun would slowly crest the horizon, painting the sky and the vast expanse of the lake in hues of rose, awakening the small fishing communities nestled along the shore. But in the early morning of June 12, 2017, in a remote county not far from the bustling city of Portland, a chilling silence had enveloped Crane Lake. It was a large freshwater lake where the morning mist hovered like a thin veil, concealing a horrifying secret about to be revealed. Sam Miller, an old fisherman with skin weathered by the sun and wind, his hands calloused from a lifetime of hauling nets, had started his workday before the sky had even begun to lighten. His small wooden boat drifted quietly across the placid surface of the lake. The only sound breaking the stillness was the rhythmic splash of his oars in the water. His work was a steady, monotonous routine, and the reward was just enough to cover the costs of a simple life. He cast his final net of the morning, hoping for a bit of luck. As he began to pull the net in, he felt an unusual weight, a dead weight that weighed his boat down. For a fleeting moment, a spark of joy lit up in the old fisherman's heart. He thought he had caught a massive haul of fish, or perhaps a valuable piece of sunken timber the current had brought his way. He summoned all the strength of his old age, the veins on his biceps standing out, and slowly pulled the heavy net closer to the side of the boat. What emerged from the murky water was not the thrashing of fish, nor was it a log. It was a large, strangely shaped object wrapped in a green duffel bag. The bag was waterlogged, swollen, and heavy. An indescribable stench, the smell of decay, began to rise, assaulting Sam's nostrils. His initial excitement quickly vanished, replaced by a vague sense of unease. With the help of a long pole, he struggled to push the duffel bag onto the damp, grassy bank of the lake. Curious and a little frightened, he used the small knife he always carried for gutting fish to slice a long gash across the bag. In that instant, a horrific sight was revealed, causing the seasoned fisherman to let out a blood-curdling scream. He stumbled backward and fell to the ground, his whole body trembling. Inside the bag was not fish, nor wood. It was a human corpse, already beginning to bloat, its hands and feet bound tightly with nylon rope. In a state of sheer panic, before Sam could even process what he was seeing, his vacant gaze drifted back out to the lake's surface, and then he saw them. It was not just one bag. Dimly visible in the early morning mist were many other duffel bags of the same green color, floating on the water, caught in patches of water hyacinths near the shore. The horror was no longer about a single murder. It had become the specter of a massacre. Sam could not dare to think further. He dropped his knife, abandoned his net, and scrambled to his feet. He ran for his life, stumbling back toward his fishing village, screaming incoherently in a voice choked with fear. Sam Miller's screams shattered the peace of the entire county. The local Klamath County Sheriff's Office was on the scene almost immediately. Witnessing the sight of duffel bags containing human bodies floating on the lake, even the most hardened deputies could not help but feel a shiver down their spines. They quickly sealed off the scene and began the grim task of retrieving the bags, one by one. 1 bag, 2 bags, then 10. The number kept climbing, and with each new bag pulled ashore, the horror multiplied. By the time the work was done, 35 duffel bags, containing 35 human lives, were lined up on the grassy bank. The vast, serene lake had been turned into a mass grave. The scale of the massacre far exceeded the jurisdiction and capabilities of the local sheriff's department. The news was urgently reported up the chain to the highest levels of the Department of Justice and the FBI. Furthermore, based on initial identifying features, there were strong indications that the victims were not locals. Recognizing the serious nature of a case with interstate elements, the FBI was immediately notified and their assistance requested. A special joint task force was quickly established. Leading the local effort was Captain Marcus Thorne of the Klamath County Sheriff's Office, a seasoned investigator with a face weathered by the Oregon sun and eyes that always held a look of firm resolve. From the FBI, the Criminal Investigation Division dispatched one of its most elite teams, led by Special Agent Ethan Vance, a young but renowned investigator known for his sharp deductive reasoning and his unique ability to analyze criminal psychology. When the Joint Task Force arrived at the scene, the forensic examination truly began in a systematic and scientific manner. Forensic experts from both the state and the FBI, clad in full protective gear, worked tirelessly. They carefully opened each bag, photographing and documenting the condition of every body. All 35 victims had their hands and feet bound with nylon rope in the exact same manner. The clothes they wore were all cheap, worn-out work clothes. The preliminary autopsy results at the scene confirmed a horrifying and undeniable fact. All 35 victims, without exception, had died before being submerged in the water. The cause of death was determined to be cranial trauma and severe multiple injuries caused by blows from a blunt object. The killer, or killers, had used something like clubs or rifle butts to beat the victims on the head and body until they were dead, only then placing the bodies in the duffel bags and dumping them in the lake to dispose of the evidence. This was not a brawl. This was an execution, a mass killing carried out in an organized, cold, and brutal fashion. During the examination, investigators also identified another crucial piece of information. Based on anthropological characteristics, all 35 victims were determined to be of Hispanic descent, including both men and women, mostly very young, between the ages of 18 and 35. This information turned the case into a national tragedy, sending shockwaves through the public and the US government. The big questions began to surface. Who were these 35 people? Why were they in a remote part of Oregon? And who had murdered them so brutally? The case was no longer a typical homicide investigation. It revealed the first signs of a vast and savage transnational criminal organization, one that specialized in the trafficking and exploitation of human labor. The investigation was now not only about finding the killers but also about dismantling an entire horrifying criminal network hiding behind promises of a better life. The challenge facing Captain Thorne, Special Agent Vance, and the Joint Task Force was immense. They were up against an invisible enemy, an organized crime syndicate, and a horrifying truth of which the discovery at Crane Lake was likely just the tip of the iceberg. The horrifying truth dredged up from the bottom of Crane Lake was not just a massacre, but a chilling declaration of war from an unseen criminal force. 35 young lives, trafficked from their homes, brutally taken in a foreign land, created a shockwave not only among the public but at the highest levels of government. An urgent directive was issued to the Joint Task Force: solve the case quickly, find the perpetrators, and eradicate the criminal organization behind this tragedy from its roots. The task force's command center was temporarily set up at a sheriff station in Klamath Falls. The atmosphere inside was tense and urgent. On large whiteboards, the disfigured photos of the 35 victims were pinned up, next to the scarce information they had. Captain Marcus Thorne and Special Agent Ethan Vance, two commanders from different agencies, now stood on the same front line, facing a common enemy who was both ruthless and cunning. The first and most urgent task was to determine the specific identities of each victim. Although they were presumed to be trafficked individuals, they needed names, ages, and hometowns to investigate further. This was an incredibly difficult task. The victims had no identification papers. A special team from the B.o.d.i.e.s Violent Criminal Apprehension Program 6CAP was tasked with reviewing all missing persons reports nationwide that had indicators of potential human trafficking over the past 6 months. Hundreds of files from across the country, especially from border states and impoverished rural areas, were sent in. Criminalists had to perform the painful job of cross-referencing DNA and fingerprint data of the missing with the 35 unidentified bodies. While the identification process was being carried out urgently, the investigative front in Oregon focused on reconstructing the criminal trail. Special Agent Ethan Vance, with his keen ability to analyze criminal psychology, made a crucial observation. A killer who commits a massacre of this magnitude can't possibly erase all traces, he said in a briefing. He can dispose of the bodies, but he can't dispose of the story behind them. These 35 people didn't just appear here. They had to be brought here, held captive, and forced to work somewhere. We have to find that compound. Based on this assessment, a large-scale search was launched, focusing on remote areas, abandoned warehouses, and illicit gambling dens in the county and surrounding regions. Undercover deputies from a sheriff's office, familiar with the local terrain, disguised themselves in various roles, infiltrating every corner, listening for any piece of information, no matter how small. And then, through fragmented stories, whispered rumors in the gambling underworld, and from illegal labor brokers, a terrifying picture of the criminal underworld began to emerge. The investigators heard about the existence of centers, shell companies scattered in remote areas, heavily guarded by armed men. These were the dens of human traffickers, places where thousands of people tricked and sold from other countries, primarily from Latin America, were imprisoned and exploited. The entire criminal network operated through a sophisticated and brutal process. It all started with alluring promises on social media targeting people in Mexico and Central America. Easy work, high pay, work in a modern office, income of thousands of dollars a month. The organization's recruiters and foot soldiers targeted unemployed young people in poor rural areas, people who were desperate for a better life but were naive and trusting. After luring their prey, they would collect a deposit, confiscate all identity papers and passports, and then arrange for them to cross the US border illegally. Once they set foot on American soil, the victims realized they had fallen into hell. They were taken to these centers and sorted like merchandise. Young, attractive women were forced to work in underground casinos, dealing cards, serving drinks, and selling their bodies to clients on demand. The rest, regardless of gender, were sent to online scam centers. This was the main source of profit and also the most brutal place. Each victim was given a phone and a detailed scam script. Their job was to make hundreds of calls a day to phone numbers across the United States, impersonating bank employees, police officers, or investment firm staff. They had to trick people back home into making wire transfers, investing in fraudulent apps, or downloading malicious software capable of stealing bank account information. The living and working conditions at these scam centers were horrific, no different from a medieval prison. The victims were held in cramped dormitories, monitored 24/7 by armed guards. They were forced to work 16 to 18 hours a day. The rules were draconian. If a victim failed to scam anyone for 3 consecutive days, they would be brutally beaten with electric batons and clubs and starved. If they failed to meet the revenue targets set by the organization within a week, the punishment was even more horrific. They would be tortured in the most barbaric ways, then sold to other criminal organizations in other states, or worse, sold to organ trafficking rings. Here, a human life was worth no more than a commodity. This information helped the task force better understand the context of the massacre. The 35 victims from Crane Lake were the very people who had been imprisoned and exploited in one of these scam centers. But the question remained, why were they all executed at once? What happened inside that concentration camp? While the investigation into the criminal organizations was underway, a critically important clue was discovered in the medical examiner's office, a desperate message from the world of the dead. While conducting the autopsy of a young male victim, a female forensic examiner from the county noticed an unusual detail. The victim's right hand was clenched into a very tight fist, so tight that his knuckles had turned white. With extreme patience and care, she used specialized tools to pry open the victim's fingers. Deep in his palm, she found a small, rolled-up object. When she carefully unfolded it under a magnifying glass, the entire morgue seemed to hold its breath. It was a small piece of plastic, torn from a cigarette pack wrapper and carefully wrapped in multiple layers to be waterproof. On the piece of plastic, etched with something sharp, perhaps a sliver of bamboo or a piece of wire, were scribbled words that were almost illegible. Special Agent Ethan Vance was called in immediately. With his experience and sharp eyes, he struggled to decipher the content of this final message. On the plastic, there were 2 pieces of information: the words Compound 7 written in Spanish, and next to it, a hand-drawn symbol, crude but quite clear, the image of a scorpion with its tail arched high. This was the first and only direct clue the task force had, a clue that came from the victims themselves. Compound 7 was very likely the name or designation of the camp where the 35 victims were held. As for the scorpion symbol, it could be the logo of the criminal organization or, more frighteningly, the nickname of the ringleader, the one who ordered the massacre. This message from the dead lit a great flame of hope, illuminating a clearer path for the investigation. The task force's mission now was to solve these 2 mysteries. Where is Compound 7, and who is the Scorpion? The fight had shifted from investigating a past crime to preventing and dismantling an active criminal organization. The clue from the small piece of plastic, a desperate relic found in the clenched fist of the deceased, became the guiding star for the entire investigation. Though fragile, it was the only tangible link connecting the present to the criminal past. The 2 mysterious clues, Compound 7 and the scorpion symbol, became the focus of all efforts. The Joint Task Force, under the command of Captain Thorne and Special Agent Vance, focused all its resources on deciphering these 2 mysteries. The investigation was divided into 2 main prongs, conducted in parallel in Oregon and in other states like California and Arizona, demonstrating the seamless coordination and strong resolve of the law enforcement agencies. In Oregon, Captain Thorne mobilized a dense network of informants to infiltrate the darkest corners of the underworld in the southern part of the state and surrounding areas. The words Compound 7 and Scorpion were whispered among gangsters, casino enforcers, and even victims who had previously escaped from trafficking rings. But gathering information was extremely difficult. The criminal world here operated by its own rules, shrouded by a code of silence and fear. No one dared to speak a word about an organization capable of carrying out a cold-blooded massacre of 35 people. Meanwhile, in California, the investigative prong led by Special Agent Vance focused on tracing the path by which the victims were trafficked. He believed that to smuggle such a large number of people across the border and then transport them states away, the criminal organization must have a network of collaborators, a shell company operating right on US soil to carry out recruitment and luring activities. The process of identifying the victims, though slow and painful, began to yield its first results. Through DNA matching, 15 of the 35 bodies were identified. A heartbreaking commonality among them was that they all came from impoverished rural communities in Mexico and Central America. Their families, in tears and despair, all told the same story. Their children had followed enticing promises online about an easy, high-paying job in the United States, paid a significant deposit to a recruitment company, and then disappeared without a trace. Following these testimonies, FBI agents began to scrutinize the activities of hundreds of labor recruitment agencies. And then one name emerged as a suspicious bright spot, a company with a very grand name, Global Reach Solutions. This company had a registered address in a small alley in Los Angeles. But when agents went there, it was just a ghost address, a rented house that had long been vacant. Digging deeper into the company's activities, the task force discovered unusual signs. Global Reach Solutions had no actual business operations, no labor export license. It only had a website and a few fan pages on social media that specialized in posting job ads with promises so attractive they were absurd. And the common thread among almost all the identified victims was that they had all contacted and paid money to this ghost company. Clearly, this was the octopus's tentacle, the extended arm of the human trafficking organization operating right within the United States. While the investigation was making significant progress on both fronts, an unexpected event, a true miracle, occurred that changed the entire complexion of the case. One late afternoon, an Oregon State Police patrol unit, during a routine patrol in a remote forest area near the California border, an area known as a hotspot for smuggling and illegal crossings, discovered a man in a state of near total exhaustion. The man was skeletal, his clothes torn to shreds, his body covered in scratches and insect bites. He was fading from hunger and thirst, his breathing shallow and weak. He was immediately taken to a nearby state police barracks for medical attention. After being cared for by medics, given food and water, and gradually regaining consciousness, the first words he spoke in a hoarse, panicked voice stunned all the troopers present. "Help! Help me! Everyone! Everyone was killed! At Compound 7. This information was immediately reported urgently to the State Police Command and the FBI. Special Agent Ethan Vance and a team flew to Southern Oregon that very night. The man, after being identified, was Leo Parrish, 26, from a small town in Mexico. His name, ironically, was on the list of the 35 victims of the Crane Lake massacre. He was the only survivor, a living witness who had returned from the dead. Once fully recovered and psychologically stable, Leo Parrish told the task force a horrifying story, a story that no horror movie could ever imagine. He recounted that he was also one of the victims tricked and sold by Global Reach Solutions. He was taken to a camp deep in a dense forest in Oregon, a place the guards called Compound 7. Everything happened just as the task force had investigated. He and hundreds of others were forced to work in an online scam center under brutal supervision and torture. The tragedy occurred about a week before the massacre. Unable to endure the hellish life, a large group of victims in Compound 7, about 40 people, secretly planned an escape. They had planned it meticulously, intending to attack a few guards and flee into the forest in the middle of the night. But the plan was exposed at the last minute by a traitor. Immediately, a bloody crackdown ensued. Everyone involved in the escape plan, and even those not involved but suspected, were dragged out into the courtyard. The leader of the entire camp, a ruthless Mexican-American man, appeared. He did not say much. He just gave a single order, an order that made everyone's blood run cold: eliminate them all. The reason he gave, from what Leo overheard, was that the escape plan had caused a major disturbance, and the local authorities might soon catch wind of it. To erase all traces, to silence all witnesses, and to clean up Compound 7 before moving to a new location, he decided to kill them all. 35 people, including Leo, were brutally beaten with clubs and rifle butts by the guards until they were unconscious. Then they tied the hands and feet of all the victims and stuffed them into large duffel bags. Leo recounted that during the beating, he was lucky to have only been grazed on the head, which knocked him out, and he feigned unconsciousness. When he was put in a bag and thrown onto a large truck, he slowly came to. In the suffocating darkness of the duffel bag, he heard the truck moving and the criminals talking about dumping them all into the lake. Knowing that if he did not act, he would surely die, Leo took a desperate chance. He used all his remaining strength to bite through a part of the rope binding his hands. As the truck slowed down at a curve in the forest, he used a razor blade he had hidden to cut a slit in the duffel bag and rolled himself out of the truck, falling into the bushes by the roadside. Fortunately for him, the criminals, engrossed in their conversation, were completely unaware. He then had to hide in the deep forest for several days, surviving on wild fruits and stream water, until he collapsed from exhaustion and was found by the state police. Leo Parrish's testimony revealed the entire horrifying truth behind the massacre. It was not a spontaneous act but a deliberate purge, an act of ruthlessly eliminating witnesses by the ringleader. And most importantly, when shown sketches and collected intelligence, Leo Parrish identified the leader. "He is the Scorpion," Leo said. No one at Compound 7 knew his real name. Everyone called him by that nickname. The reason is because on his neck, just below his right ear, he has a very distinctive scorpion tattoo, a tattoo that terrified anyone who saw it. He, a Mexican-American man whose real name was Salazar, was the one running the entire human trafficking and scam network in the region. A devil in human form. The portrait of the evil perpetrator was finally clear. Now, the task force had everything they needed: the motive, the sequence of events of the crime, and most importantly, the identity and distinguishing features of the ultimate boss. A final battle, a large-scale manhunt, was about to begin. The testimony of Leo Parrish, the sole living witness who returned from the dead, was like a bombshell exploding within the task force. It not only confirmed the worst hypotheses but also unveiled a horrifying truth beyond imagination. The entire story of Compound 7, the failed escape plan, and the barbaric massacre to cover their tracks was now fully and painfully reconstructed. Most importantly, the portrait of the ringleader, the ultimate boss of the entire criminal network, emerged clearly. Salazar, a Mexican-American man known as the Scorpion, with his distinctive neck tattoo. Immediately, this golden piece of identification was shared between federal and state law enforcement. A large-scale identity search for Salazar the Scorpion was initiated. Criminal databases from the FBI and police departments across the Southwest were scoured, and it did not take long to find him. Salazar, 42, was a notorious criminal with a long and sordid record, including numerous prior convictions for drug trafficking, arms dealing, and organizing illegal border crossings. He had served time in prison in several states, but with his cunning and ruthlessness, he always found a way to escape or receive light sentences. In recent years, Salazar had disappeared from police surveillance, believed to be in retirement. But in reality, he had built a new criminal empire, one more sophisticated and brutal than before: human trafficking and online fraud. Now that the enemy was unmasked, a big question arose. Where exactly was his den, Compound 7? Although Leo Parrish had provided invaluable information, he could not pinpoint the exact location of the camp. He only remembered being blindfolded and driven in a truck for many hours, deep into a remote, dense forest area with no cell phone signal. The investigation faced another colossal challenge. Finding a secret camp amidst thousands of square miles of temperate rainforest in the border region was a nearly impossible task. They could not conduct a large-scale search, as that would immediately alert Salazar and his cronies, giving them enough time to erase all traces and move to a new location. They needed a swift, surprising, and absolutely precise strike plan. Faced with this situation, a high-level meeting was held between leaders from the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. A historic decision was made: to form a joint special operations task force to launch a combined manhunt, codenamed Venom Strike. The objective of the operation was not only to capture Salazar the Scorpion, but also to dismantle his entire den, rescue any remaining victims, and gather sufficient evidence to bring the entire criminal network to light. The forces participating in Operation Venom Strike included the most elite units from both federal and state agencies, the FBI's Hostage Rescue Team HRT, and elite tactical units from the Oregon State Police. Special Agent Ethan Vance and Captain Marcus Thorne were once again entrusted with the roles of co-commanders of the operation. The first and most difficult task was to pinpoint the location of Compound 7. The task force employed the most advanced surveillance technology. Satellite imagery analysts worked day and night, reviewing thousands of photos of the border region taken over the past few months, hoping to find any unusual signs like newly cleared land, new trails, or clusters of shacks not on any map. Simultaneously, another bold plan was deployed. They used reconnaissance drones, capable of flying at high altitudes without making noise and equipped with thermal cameras. Guided by Leo Parrish's vague directions about the travel route and a few topographical features he remembered, these drones began a silent search from the sky. They flew over vast forests, scanning each area, searching for any unusual heat sources emitted by human activity. After many days of patient and tense searching, one of the drones sent back a decisive image. Deep in a remote valley, surrounded by treacherous rocky cliffs, the thermal camera detected a large cluster of heat sources concentrated in the shape of a camp. Subsequent optical images confirmed it was a well-built compound, surrounded by a barbed wire fence and several watchtowers. This was it, the Scorpion's den. With the location confirmed, a detailed raid plan was drawn up. The time of action was set for 4 a.m., the moment when the guards would be most tired and least vigilant. The assault force was divided into 4 teams that would simultaneously approach from 4 different directions, forming a tightening pincer grip, leaving no chance for anyone to escape. To ensure secrecy while moving through the forest, the special forces were assisted by local guides who knew the terrain like the back of their hands. On the night before the raid, the atmosphere at the field command post was as tense as a drawn bowstring. Special Agent Vance and Captain Thorne stood before a sand table, reviewing the Plan 1 last time. Every scenario, from neutralizing the watchtowers and breaching the fence to storming the command building and rescuing hostages, was calculated down to the smallest detail. The lives of dozens of operators and the fate of the victims still imprisoned inside depended entirely on the success of this mission. As night fell, under the cover of darkness and the chirping of insects in the mountain forest, the assault team set out silently. They moved like ghosts, weaving through the dense forest, crossing swift streams, step by step closing in on the enemy's den. Every soldier held their breath, heart pounding in their chest, weapon ready. They were entering the tiger's den to carry out a sacred mission, to bring justice and to neutralize the venom of the ruthless Scorpion. The final battle was about to begin. The sky above the dense border forest was still a pitch-black, inky void. The moon had set long ago, leaving only a few faint stars twinkling weakly through the thick canopy. The air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of decaying leaves and wet earth. The silence of the mountains was almost absolute, occasionally broken by the mournful cry of some nocturnal bird. It was in this deathly silence that the real ghosts were moving. The Joint Special Operations Task Force of Operation Venom Strike, composed of the most elite soldiers from both the FBI and Oregon State Police, had spent over 2 hours navigating the forest in the dark, scaling steep slopes and crossing icy streams. Now, they were in their designated positions, forming an invisible but impenetrable siege, tightening their grip on the den of Salazar the Scorpion. All movements were executed in absolute silence. Orders were relayed through hand signals or near inaudible whispers over micro headsets. At the field command post, located a few kilometers away, Special Agent Ethan Vance and Captain Marcus Thorne were glued to the screens displaying live feeds from the drones hovering high above. The thermal camera showed that the compound below was still quiet. Most of the heat signatures were concentrated inside the barracks, indicating that the occupants were asleep. Only a few small, bright spots moved slowly and sluggishly at the 4 watchtowers erected at the corners of the camp. Those were the guards. The watch on Agent Vance's wrist showed exactly 4 a.m. The decisive moment had arrived. He took a deep breath, brought the radio microphone close, and gave a single, short, pre-coded command: strike. The order was instantly transmitted to all assault teams. At 4 hidden positions on the high hills surrounding the camp, for Special Forces snipers, who had been in position and aiming at their targets for over an hour, acted in unison. For dry, almost inaudible thwips echoed almost simultaneously. 4 subsonic rounds fired from suppressed sniper rifles tore through the air at terrifying speed. In the 4 watchtowers, the 4 guards, who were still yawning or leaning against the wooden railings to doze off, collapsed instantly without making a sound. The perfectly accurate bullets had struck them in the head, ending their lives in an instant. Tango down, all stations. A report came through the commander's earpieces. The first phase of the plan had succeeded perfectly. The element of surprise was still intact. Immediately after the watchtowers were neutralized, the 4 main assault teams, like hunting leopards, burst out of the darkness, simultaneously approaching the barbed wire fence from 4 directions. They moved with astonishing speed, as light as falling leaves. Using specialized bolt cutters, they quickly severed the sharp layers of fencing, creating openings just large enough for the teams to slip through. However, just as the first team made it past the fence, an unforeseen incident occurred. A large German shepherd, kept by the criminals for security, seemed to have caught the scent of strangers. It suddenly bolted out from under a shack, barking loudly and ferociously. The dog's barking shattered the deadly silence. Instantly, lights flickered on in several barracks. A few criminals, likely the enforcers, awoke with a start, grabbing their AK-47s and rushing outside. The element of surprise was no longer absolute. Engage! Vance's second command rang out, with no more hesitation. Instantly, the entire camp erupted like a disturbed hornet's nest. The deafening, jarring sound of gunfire erupted from everywhere. Red and green traces tore through the night, weaving into a deadly web of fire. The criminals, though taken by surprise, fought back furiously with their gangster nature and heavy weaponry. They took cover behind wooden walls and sandbags, firing indiscriminately toward the Special Forces. However, their resistance was merely a panicked, disorganized reaction. They were facing a highly trained force with clear tactics and superior fighting spirit. The special operators quickly took advantageous positions, using the terrain for cover and coordinating with each other seamlessly. They did not fire wildly. Every bullet they fired had a target. The sound of their gunfire was crisp, decisive, completely different from the chaotic bursts of the criminals. While 3 assault teams engaged in fierce combat, pinning down and eliminating the majority of the enemy forces, the 4th team, the main effort led by Captain Thorne himself, took advantage of the chaos. They moved quickly along a predetermined secret path, closing in on the most important target, the command building in the center of the camp, where they believed Salazar the Scorpion was located. The command building was more sturdily built than the other barracks, with iron-barred windows and a thick wooden main door. 2 of Salazar's loyal bodyguards stood guard outside, firing frantically at the other assault teams. They had no idea that death was right behind them. Captain Thorne's team, approaching from both sides of the building, tossed 2 flashbang grenades. 2 loud explosions erupted, accompanied by a blinding flash of light, causing the 2 bodyguards to fall, their ears ringing and their vision gone. Instantly, 2 operators rushed forward and neutralized them swiftly. The main door was kicked open with a thunderous blow, and the whole team stormed inside. But the scene inside was not what they expected. Salazar the Scorpion was not holding a gun to fight back. The man, with a muscular build, a face covered in crisscrossing scars, and especially the black scorpion tattoo on his neck, was in a different state of panic. He was frantically throwing documents, ledgers, and notebooks into a burning oil drum in the middle of the room. He was trying to destroy all the evidence. The smell of burning paper and acrid smoke filled the room. "Freeze! Drop your weapons!" Captain Thorne shouted in both English and Spanish. Salazar flinched and turned around, seeing the black muzzles of guns pointed directly at him. He knew it was over, but there was not a trace of fear on his face. Instead, a cruel, defiant smirk appeared. He raised his hands high in a gesture of surrender, but his eyes still glinted with a chilling coldness. The firefight outside ended shortly after. Faced with the overwhelming and organized assault of the Special Forces, the entire criminal gang was completely neutralized. A few who stubbornly resisted were eliminated on the spot. The rest, seeing their boss captured, threw down their weapons and surrendered. The task force had successfully taken control of the entire compound without any casualties on their side. As dawn began to break, the swift raid was completely over. Salazar, the Scorpion, the kingpin of a criminal empire, had been captured alive. He was handcuffed and kneeling in the middle of the courtyard, yet he held his head high, looking at the special forces with eyes that showed no remorse. When Special Agent Vance stepped in front of him, he even spat on the ground and said in a harsh, contemptuous voice, "What the hell do you people know? I was just taking out the trash for society." That statement revealed the full, inhuman nature of the monster. To him, the 35 lives he had snuffed out and the hundreds of others he held captive were not human beings. They were just trash, tools for him to make money. While the captured suspects were being secured and the command building was sealed off for investigation, another team proceeded to check the remaining barracks. And there, they found the victims of Compound 7. Over 50 people, both men and women, were locked in cramped, filthy dormitories. When the doors were opened, they cowered in fear, their eyes vacant, unable to believe what was happening. They were emaciated, malnourished, their bodies covered in fresh and old scars from torture and beatings. It took a long while, seeing the soldiers in uniform and hearing them speak, for them to realize they had been rescued. Sobs, shouts of joy, and cries of pain erupted, creating a chaotic but emotional sound that tore through the deadly atmosphere of the raid. Dawn had truly come to Compound 7. The raid, Operation Venom Strike, had ended in a complete tactical victory, but what it left behind was a raw and painful reality. As the first rays of the new day shone down on the valley, they brought no life, only further exposing the hell on Earth known as Compound 7. The acrid smell of gunpowder mingled with the stench of filth and mold from the camp, and the smell of fear and despair that had accumulated for so long. The work of examining the scene and collecting evidence began with extreme urgency. Salazar's command building became the focal point of the investigation. Although he had tried to destroy everything, the fire had not consumed it all. Experts carefully collected the charred pieces of paper from the oil drum. Using forensic techniques, they hoped to restore a portion of the ledgers, the human trafficking contracts, the lists of victims, and the records of the enormous profits built on the blood, sweat, and tears of hundreds of people. Meanwhile, relief efforts and initial interviews with the more than 50 rescued victims were also underway. Their condition was tragic. Most were suffering from severe malnutrition, their bodies covered in scars from torture. Psychologically, they were deeply traumatized. Many were still in a state of extreme panic, flinching when strangers approached. Others just sat in silence, their eyes empty and lifeless, as if their souls had long died inside their emaciated bodies. Their initial testimonies, though fragmented and tearful, painted a complete and horrifying picture of the brutal regime of Salazar and his gang. Each story was a powerful indictment of crimes against humanity. With the capture of the entire gang, the rescue of the surviving victims, and the collection of a vast amount of physical evidence, the investigative phase of the case was essentially closed. The testimony of the living witness, Leo Parrish, combined with the testimonies of dozens of other victims, the autopsy results of the 35 victims from Crane Lake, and the documents recovered from Compound 7, formed an unshakable and irrefutable body of evidence. The Joint Investigating Agency issued its final report, recommending the prosecution of Salazar the Scorpion and his entire gang. Due to the particularly grave nature of the case involving citizens of multiple countries and crimes committed on U.S. soil, a special federal trial was established by the Department of Justice to be held in Portland. This was not just a criminal trial but a symbolic legal event, demonstrating a collective determination to combat transnational human trafficking. A few months later, the trial of Salazar the Scorpion and his accomplices took place. The case attracted significant international media attention. The main courtroom of the U.S. District Court in Portland was packed. In the gallery, dozens of family members of the 35 deceased victims had traveled from their home countries. Their faces were etched with an inconsolable grief. Leo Parrish, the sole witness to the massacre, was also present. He sat quietly in the front row, his gaze never leaving the man who had turned his life and the lives of dozens of others into a living hell. When the courtroom doors opened, Salazar and his co-conspirators were let in. Unlike other criminals who often show fear or remorse, Salazar walked with his head held high. He was thinner than when he was captured, but his eyes were as cold and defiant as ever. He glanced around the courtroom, his gaze settling on the area where the victims' families were seated, and a contemptuous half-smile flickered across his lips. He had no remorse. The trial began. The assistant U.S. attorneys presented the indictment. The entire criminal conspiracy of Salazar and his gang was reconstructed in detailed and comprehensive fashion, from establishing the shell company, Global Reach Solutions, to lure unsuspecting laborists, to smuggling them across the border, imprisoning, torturing, and exploiting their labor in online scam centers, and finally, the barbaric massacre of 35 people simply to silence witnesses and erase evidence. The most crucial and emotional part of the trial was when Leo Parrish was called to the witness stand. He walked with a slight limp, a lingering effect of his jump from the truck. Standing before the court, facing the man who had once decided his fate, his voice trembled at first but then became strong and clear. He recounted his entire story, from the first day he was deceived, the days of living a life worse than death at Compound 7, the beatings with rods, the tarzings, and the despair of watching his friends being tortured to death. He recounted the hopeful escape plan and the horrifying collapse when it was exposed. That day, Leo's voice choked. He, Salazar, stood before all of us. He didn't say much. He just looked at us like we were animals. Then he ordered his men. Beat them. Beat them until they're dead. I saw my friend, the one lying next to me, have his head smashed in with an iron bar. There was blood everywhere, screams, pleas for mercy. But he just stood there, arms crossed, and smiled. The courtroom fell silent, filled only with the muffled sobs of mothers and fathers who had lost their children. Your Honor, Leo turned, pointing directly at Salazar in the defendant's box. That devil, he was the one who ordered everyone to be killed. He took the lives of 35 of my friends. And if I hadn't been lucky enough to escape that day, I would be a corpse at the bottom of Crane Lake today. I ask the court to bring justice for the dead. Throughout Leo's testimony, Salazar sat motionless, his expression unchanged. He showed no signs of emotion or remorse. He seemed to be savoring the pain of others. The defense's arguments were almost non-existent. The court-appointed lawyers for Salazar and his gang had virtually no points to rebut. The system of evidence from the testimonies of dozens of witnesses, the autopsy results, the recovered documents, to Salazar's own unconcealed admissions in his depositions formed an iron wall of truth. When given the chance to make a final statement, Salazar the Scorpion stood up. He did not apologize, nor did he ask for mercy. He looked directly at the judge and jury, at the victims' families, and said in a voice as cold as ice, "Those people, they were stupid, so they deserve to die. They were moths flying into a flame. They were a burden on society. If I didn't kill them, someone else would have. I did nothing wrong. I was just taking out the trash." His final words exposed the full inhuman, depraved nature of a demon. It extinguished any last glimmer of hope for his repentance, and was also a final knife twisted deep into the wounds of those left behind. After deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. They found Salazar's actions to be part of an organized transnational crime with unprecedented scale and brutality. He was found guilty not only of human trafficking but also of mass murder, torture, and inhumane treatment of victims. His actions had caused exceptionally severe consequences, not only taking the lives of 35 people but also causing extreme outrage in the international community, trampling on the most fundamental values of human rights. Considering his role as the ringleader, mastermind, who directly ordered and carried out the crimes with a brutal and unrepentant attitude, the court found the defendant Salazar to be beyond rehabilitation and that he needed to be permanently removed from society. On that basis, the presiding judge sentenced the defendant Salazar, alias the Scorpion, to the maximum penalty, death, for the crimes of mass murder and human trafficking. The remaining accomplices, depending on their level of culpability, received harsh sentences ranging from 20 years to life in prison. The sentence concluded one of the most horrific and complex cases in the region's criminal history. Justice was finally served, but the pain and loss left by Salazar and his criminal empire would be a scar that would never heal. The case served as a stark warning about the cruel face of human trafficking, a reminder that behind the promises of easy work and high pay can lie a hell on earth, where the value of human life is considered cheaper than dirt.